This alien girl would have been torn apart by creatures. But one human stepped forward. The stars were a bright blur across the dark sky as Lyra's spaceship fell through the atmosphere of the alien planet. Inside the ship, alarms blared and the cabin shook violently. She struggled to keep her grip on the control panel, her fingers slick with sweat. She had been trained for many things, ruling her people, fighting in battle, and even surviving harsh conditions, but never for this. The ship's systems were failing. The warning lights flashed as the ship plummeted toward the surface of the planet, spiraling uncontrollably. She slammed her fist on the console, trying to correct the descent, but the ship was beyond saving. She could feel the heat rising from the outside, hear the hull of the ship groaning under the pressure. The ground was coming closer, too fast. With a final scream of metal tearing, the ship hit the ground, sending a shockwave through the forest below. The craft shattered upon impact, a ball of fire and twisted steel. Lyra was thrown forward, her vision blurring as she felt the sharp sting of debris slicing through her skin. The world went black. When she awoke, she was lying on the cold ground. The fire from the crash was out, but smoke still hung thick in the air. Her head ached, and her body felt as though it had been broken in half. She pushed herself up, gritting her teeth against the pain, and tried to make sense of her surroundings. She was deep in a jungle, surrounded by towering trees and thick vines. The air was humid, and the sounds of strange creatures echoed in the distance. The ship was a ruin behind her, its hull twisted and smoking. Lyra tried to focus, but dizziness clouded her thoughts. She had to move, she had to survive. Carefully, she pulled herself to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. The jungle was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. She glanced around, looking for something to give her a sense of direction. She had no idea where she was, no idea how to get out of this place. She had never planned for a crash landing. There had been no warning. Her mission had been simple, to escape her enemies and find a safe place to wait out the storm. But now she was stranded, and she was not alone. She heard a rustling sound in the underbrush. Her heart skipped a beat. It could be any number of things, some form of predator, some alien creature that hunted at night. She couldn't afford to be caught by surprise. With trembling hands, she reached for the weapon hidden at her side, a small energy pistol she had managed to grab during the crash. It was not much, but it was all she had. The rustling grew louder, closer. She held her breath and steadied herself, ready to fight. But as the creature emerged from the trees, her heart sank. It was not an alien beast, not a creature from the jungle at all. It was human. The man stood before her, tall and imposing, his face hidden beneath a helmet. His armor was battered, showing signs of wear from past battles. In his hands, he held a rifle, and his eyes narrowed as they locked onto hers. He didn't move for a moment, sizing her up, as if unsure whether she was a threat or a victim. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. "Who are you?" Lyra managed to force out, her voice hoarse. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a cautious step forward, his weapon still aimed at her. "I should ask you the same thing," he said, his voice low and steady. There was no hint of fear in his tone, no sign of hesitation. He had seen far too many dangerous situations to be intimidated by her. Lyra's heart raced. She didn't know what kind of human he was, or whether he could be trusted. The last thing she needed was to be taken by someone who might want to capture her, sell her to the highest bidder, or worse. She had been a princess, a ruler, her entire life. She had never been in a situation where her fate was uncertain, where she had to depend on anyone other than herself. But now, she was weak, alone, and lost in an unfamiliar world. And this man had the power to end it all. "I'm not here to harm you," he said after a long pause, lowering his weapon slightly. "But you're not safe here. There are creatures in this jungle, dangerous ones." Lyra's mind raced. She had heard rumors about dangerous wildlife in this region, but she had no idea how bad it truly was. And now, this man, whoever he was, seemed to be the only one who could help her. But could she trust him? "I'm not interested in your help," she said, trying to sound confident. "I can handle myself." He didn't respond right away, instead taking a step closer. His eyes scanned the area, his posture alert. "You're lying," he said bluntly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're hurt and you're lost. You don't know this place." Her pride flared, but she couldn't deny it. He was right. She was hurt. She was lost. And worse, she had no idea how to get out of this mess. She needed help, but asking for it felt like an admission of weakness. Something her people would never do, but survival came first. "I don't need you," she said again, her voice firmer this time, though the uncertainty in her chest told a different story. I can find my way. The man seemed to study her for a moment longer before letting out a sigh. He holstered his weapon and reached down, offering her a hand. If you want to survive out here, you'll need help. I've been here before. I know what to do. Lyra hesitated, glancing at the hand he extended. She didn't want to accept it. She didn't want to be dependent on anyone. But the jungle was vast, the dangers numerous, and she knew deep down that she couldn't survive on her own, not like this. Not without her ship, not without her people. She finally accepted his hand, if only because she had no other choice. As his fingers closed around hers, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. He wasn't like the other humans she had encountered. He didn't seem afraid of her or eager to use her for his own gain. He simply wanted to help. Fine, she said, her voice soft. But this doesn't mean I trust you. The man's lips quirked slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he helped her to her feet, steadying her when she wavered. As she stood, her gaze locked with his, and for a brief moment, she wondered what kind of man he was. What kind of man would help a stranger in this harsh, unforgiving place? I'm Nathan, he said simply, and if you want to survive, you'll need more than just a weapon. You'll need knowledge, and you'll need me. Lyra didn't say anything. She couldn't. The world around her was closing in, and for the first time in her life, she was not in control. But Nathan had made one thing clear. She wasn't alone. And that for now was enough. The forest was alive with sounds, soft rustling in the trees, the distant call of unknown creatures, and the occasional snap of twigs underfoot. Lyra followed Nathan through the dense jungle, her eyes scanning the environment, alert to every movement. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the tangled undergrowth. Sweat trickled down her face as she fought to keep up with Nathan, who moved through the wilderness with the ease of someone who had spent years in places like this. Her body ached from the crash, and every step felt like a struggle. Despite her alien resilience, she was not immune to pain. She could feel the bruises on her side, the cuts along her arms, and the throbbing in her head from the impact. She had been trained to endure, but this was different. The jungle was a world unto itself, and it didn't care who she was or where she came from. Nathan didn't seem to notice her struggle. He walked ahead, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. His movements were methodical, deliberate. He was on high alert. He knew this world better than she did, and it made Lyra uneasy. She didn't like depending on anyone. She had always been in control, always had people to rely on. But here in this strange and hostile place, she was alone, except for him. She glanced at him again, his broad back and steady pace. His armor was worn, scratched in places, and his rifle was slung casually over his shoulder. Despite the fact that he seemed to have everything under control, she could see the exhaustion in his posture. He was no stranger to hardship. The way he moved, the way he handled his weapon, it spoke of countless battles fought and survived. How long have you been on this planet? Lyra asked, her voice low but cutting through the silence. Nathan didn't immediately respond. He paused for a moment, glancing over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto hers. A few weeks, he said, his tone as calm as ever. This place isn't kind to newcomers. Lyra nodded, her mind racing. A few weeks meant that Nathan had been here long enough to know the dangers of the jungle. That knowledge was invaluable, but it also meant he had survived without the help of anyone. He had made it on his own. It was something she had always prided herself on doing, surviving. But now her pride felt like a weight around her chest. The reality was undeniable. She was out of her element. The path grew steeper, and they began to ascend a small hill. Lyra's breath came in sharp bursts, and she had to pause several times to rest, wiping the sweat from her brow. Nathan didn't stop. He moved ahead without looking back, clearly focused on the task at hand. She could hear his boots crunching over the rocky terrain, but she didn't dare ask him to slow down. She didn't want to appear weak. After what felt like hours, they reached the top of the hill. Lyra could see a small clearing ahead, the trees thinning out just enough to allow a view of the horizon. The landscape stretched before her, an ocean of green, interrupted only by the jagged peaks of distant mountains. But even in the beauty of the scene, there was something unsettling about the emptiness. It felt like they were the only two living beings on this entire planet. Nathan stopped at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the distant hills. He crouched low, his hand signaling for Lyra to join him. She stepped forward cautiously, trying to remain as silent as possible. When she reached him, she could see what he was looking at. A large creature, unlike anything Lyra had ever seen, moved slowly through the trees. It was massive, with thick, leathery skin and long, sharp claws that dragged against the ground. Its head was large and round, with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. It was hunting, moving with terrifying precision. Lyra's heart began to race as the creature drew closer to their position. Nathan turned to her, his expression serious. "Stay low, and don't make a sound. We can't afford to get noticed." Lyra nodded, her body going still. She had faced creatures like this before, but never in such an unfamiliar place. She could feel her pulse in her throat, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to think. She had to be smart. The creature passed them by, unaware of their presence. They remained crouched, barely breathing, as it lumbered into the distance. Lyra waited for what felt like an eternity before Nathan gave a small nod, signaling that it was safe to move. They stood up cautiously and continued their trek through the jungle. Lyra's mind was still racing. What kind of creature was that? And how many more were out here? She didn't have the answers, but Nathan seemed unfazed. His ability to stay calm under pressure was both impressive and frustrating. She wanted to ask him how he remained so steady, but she didn't want to seem weak. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the jungle swallowing them whole with its dense canopy and endless underbrush. Lyra's legs were sore, and her stomach growled with hunger. But still, Nathan pushed on, never once slowing his pace. Finally, as the sun began to set, they reached a small, rocky outcrop overlooking a stream. Nathan paused, motioning for Lyra to stop. He knelt down by the water, filling a small canteen from the stream. Lyra followed suit, grateful for the chance to rest. She drank eagerly, the cool water soothing her dry throat. It was strange, but even in this wild place, Nathan had a way of making things seem more manageable. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "Tomorrow we keep moving." Lyra nodded, too tired to argue. She didn't trust this planet, and she didn't trust Nathan completely. But for now, she had no choice but to rely on him. As night fell and the stars began to dot the sky, Lyra found herself staring up at the unfamiliar constellations, wondering how long it would take to get off this planet. The morning arrived quietly. The jungle was still, the air thick with humidity, and the only sounds were the distant calls of unknown creatures. Lyra woke up to find Nathan already awake, crouched by the stream, cleaning his rifle. She stretched, feeling the tightness in her muscles, and winced. Her body was sore from the crash and the trek through the jungle, but she pushed through it. She had no choice. Nathan didn't acknowledge her, not yet. His focus was on the task at hand. He was methodical, the way he always was. Lyra had learned in the short time she had known him that Nathan was a man of few words, and when he spoke, it was usually out of necessity. She, on the other hand, had always been surrounded by people who spoke in riddles and politics, who hid their true feelings behind royal titles and ceremonies. She wasn't used to this kind of directness. Nathan made no effort to hide his thoughts, and he expected the same in return. Lyra stood up, brushing off the dirt that clung to her clothes. The crash had left her with only the basics, clothing that was torn, a few supplies in a bag she had managed to salvage, and a small weapon that was more for defense than offense. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She had no other choice but to rely on what little she had and what Nathan could teach her. "Ready?" Nathan asked without looking up, his voice gruff. Lyra nodded, trying to ignore the unease that curled in her stomach. It had been a long night, filled with strange noises and the rustling of creatures that came far too close for comfort. The fear of being hunted never fully left her. She could still hear the growls and distant screeches, the eerie howls of predators that filled the air with a sense of dread. She wasn't used to fear. As a princess, she had always been in control, a leader with the power to command armies. But here on this strange planet, she was small. She was vulnerable. Nathan had saved her life once, but that wasn't enough to guarantee she would make it through. She had to find a way to become strong again, to take control of her situation. "I'll keep watch," Nathan said, standing up and shouldering his rifle. "You pack what we can carry." Lyra didn't argue. She bent down to gather what little she had, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of her small weapon. It was an odd comfort, but it wasn't enough to protect her against the dangers lurking in the jungle. As she packed, her thoughts drifted. She had been sent to this planet for a reason. Her people had been under threat for months now, and she had been the target. The political struggles of her world were far from over, but the crash had left her stranded, cut off from everything. Her connection to her people was gone. For now, all that mattered was survival. She glanced at Nathan, who was scanning the tree line, his posture tense. He was always alert, always ready for something to go wrong. Lyra had no doubt that he had seen many dangerous situations in his life, but it seemed as though this planet was constantly throwing new challenges at him. He had no idea what kind of world he was dealing with. It wasn't just dangerous creatures that threatened them. It was the land itself, the unpredictable elements, the unknowns that could strike at any moment. "Let's go," Nathan said, interrupting her thoughts. "We'll move fast today." Lyra nodded and followed him, her mind still racing. They moved through the jungle quickly, keeping low to the ground, trying to remain as quiet as possible. The dense trees and vines made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead, but Nathan seemed to know exactly where he was going. Lyra had no idea where they were headed, but she didn't question him. For now, he was the only guide she had. As they made their way deeper into the jungle, the terrain grew rougher. The path was more difficult to navigate, with rocks and fallen branches scattered across the ground. Lyra stumbled a few times, her tired legs threatening to give out beneath her, but she pushed through. She refused to slow Nathan down. He had given her his trust, and she would repay it by proving she could survive on her own. After a while, the dense foliage began to clear. Lyra could feel the change in the air as the temperature dropped slightly, and the sounds of the jungle grew quieter. Nathan slowed, crouching low again. Lyra followed his lead, instinctively feeling the change. Something was off. She looked around, but there was no sign of danger, no sounds, no movement. Yet she felt it, the tension in the air, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. Without warning, Nathan moved again, signaling for her to stay low and follow him. They began to move more cautiously now, careful with every step. Lyra's heart began to beat faster as the silence grew louder. There was something in the distance, something large. She could feel its presence even if she couldn't see it. They moved through the trees, keeping their distance from whatever lay ahead. Lyra's pulse quickened, her body tense, her breath shallow. She didn't know what Nathan had sensed, but he had seen enough to know when to be cautious. Her instincts were on high alert now, her mind racing through every possible threat this jungle could throw at them. And then they saw it. A massive beast, twice the size of a bear, emerged from the trees ahead. Its fur was matted and covered in scars, its eyes glowing a fierce yellow. The creature was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Its sharp claws glinted in the dim light, and its teeth were long and jagged, sharp enough to tear through metal. It sniffed the air, its head swinging from side to side, and Lyra realized with a shock that it had caught their scent. It was hunting them. Nathan didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee, raising his rifle and aiming it at the creature's chest. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen him move so quickly, so decisively. He was like a machine, his training kicking in without a second thought. She could feel the fear rising in her chest, but she couldn't let it control her. She had to act. Before she could react, the creature charged. Nathan fired, the blast ringing out through the jungle. The shot struck the beast, but it didn't stop it. The creature roared, its massive body crashing through the trees as it lunged at them with terrifying speed. Nathan fired again, this time hitting the creature in the side. The beast stumbled but kept coming, enraged. Lyra didn't think. She acted. She pulled her weapon from her side, aimed, and fired. The energy blast struck the creature in the head, and it let out a deafening screech before collapsing to the ground. For a moment there was only silence. The creature lay still, its massive form crumpled at their feet. Nathan stood, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the area for any more threats. Lyra kept her weapon trained on the fallen creature, ready for anything. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she knew one thing: they had survived, together. Nathan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Nice shot," he said, his voice low but approving. Lyra didn't respond. She couldn't. She was still processing the fact that they had just faced down one of the deadliest creatures in the jungle and lived to tell the tale. But as the adrenaline slowly faded, she realized something. She had just saved both of their lives. It wasn't just Nathan's knowledge of the jungle that kept them alive, it was their combined strength. Lyra wasn't just a helpless alien girl, she was capable, she was a fighter, and she had proven it. The jungle seemed to close in around them after the battle with the creature. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the trees themselves were watching. Lyra could still hear the echo of the beast's roar, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the fight began to wear off. Her muscles ached, and the weight of their situation hit her all over again. The jungle was relentless. The threat was constant. Nathan didn't seem affected by the encounter. He moved ahead with the same steady pace, his eyes scanning the trees, alert to every sound. He didn't speak, and Lyra didn't press him for conversation. She had learned that silence was his way of staying focused, of dealing with the world around him. For now, it seemed to work for him, and she had no right to ask him to do otherwise. But Lyra couldn't ignore the questions in her mind. What were they going to do next? They had no map, no way of knowing where the nearest settlement or safe zone was. Her ship was a wreck, scattered across the jungle floor like a broken toy. She had no idea how long it would take to repair it, or if that was even an option. She wasn't even sure if they could survive another day in the jungle, let alone weeks. "How much further?" Lyra asked after a long silence. Her voice felt thin, almost foreign to her. She was used to commanding, to leading with authority, but here all of that was useless. She was a stranger on a strange planet, and every step she took was uncertain. Nathan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We'll make camp soon. There's a clearing not far from here." His voice was calm, but there was a hint of urgency in it now. Lyra could tell that he, too, was starting to feel the strain of their journey. It had been days since the crash, and though they had managed to survive, there was no telling how much longer they could keep this up. They walked on in silence, the dense jungle pressing around them like a wall. The path was becoming more difficult to navigate, with thick vines and fallen branches blocking their way. Lyra's legs were growing tired again, but she pushed herself onward. She refused to show weakness. The jungle didn't care about weakness. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin, and Lyra could see a small clearing ahead. It wasn't much, just an open space surrounded by tall grass and a few scattered rocks, but it was a place to rest. She breathed a sigh of relief as they approached the edge of the clearing, but Nathan held up a hand, signaling for her to stop. "Stay here," he said quietly. "I'll check it out first." Lyra didn't argue. She watched as Nathan moved into the clearing, his footsteps light and deliberate. He moved with the ease of someone who had been trained to navigate dangerous situations. He scanned the area, his eyes flicking back and forth, looking for any signs of danger. After a moment, he nodded to himself and gestured for her to join him. "It's clear," he said. Lyra stepped into the clearing, grateful for the chance to rest. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the grass. She dropped her pack to the ground and sat on a rock, taking a deep breath. The air was cooler here, and for a brief moment she felt a sense of calm, but it didn't last long. The weight of the situation hung over her, a constant reminder that they weren't safe. Not yet. Nathan had already started a small fire, carefully arranging the wood and using a flint to spark the flames. Lyra watched him, fascinated by how efficient he was. Everything he did seemed purposeful, calculated. He didn't waste time, and he didn't make mistakes. It was something she admired, even if she didn't always show it. The fire crackled as it grew, the warmth radiating toward them. Nathan sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the flames. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the occasional snap of the fire and the distant calls of animals in the jungle. Lyra's thoughts wandered back to her people. She had been a princess, a leader among her people, respected and feared by those who knew her. Now she was stranded, alone on an alien world with only Nathan to rely on. She felt a pang of homesickness, but there was little time to dwell on it. She had to survive. She had to find a way to get off this planet. "You said you've been here for weeks," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. "How did you survive?" Nathan didn't immediately answer. He stared into the fire for a long moment, his expression hard to read. "I've been to a lot of places," he said finally. "Some are worse than this. Some are better. It's all about staying ahead of the threats, knowing when to fight and when to run." His voice was steady, but there was a note of bitterness in it, as though he had seen too much to remain unaffected. Lyra nodded slowly, processing his words. "I've faced danger before, but nothing like this." Her voice was quieter now, and she didn't look at him as she spoke. "I've never felt so powerless." Nathan's eyes flicked to her, his gaze sharp. "You're not powerless." Lyra met his gaze, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. "I'm not a fighter like you. I don't know how to survive in this place." He shook his head slightly, almost as if he was amused. "You don't need to be a fighter. You just need to survive. It's not about fighting everything that comes at you. It's about knowing when to fight, when to hide, when to wait. Survival is more about patience than strength. Lyra thought about that for a moment. She had always been a leader, always in control, always on the offensive. But here on this planet it was different. The rules were different. And she was learning, slowly but surely, that sometimes survival meant holding back, staying hidden, waiting for the right moment. Nathan stood up and began to prepare their meager dinner, some dried food from his pack, a few berries they had gathered earlier. Lyra joined him, her hunger overcoming her pride. She hadn't eaten much since the crash, and her body was reminding her that it couldn't keep going on willpower alone. As they ate in silence, Lyra thought about their next move. She didn't know what the future held, but she couldn't let herself think too far ahead. Survival was all that mattered right now. They needed to keep moving to find a way to escape the jungle to get off this planet. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed Nathan. She needed his knowledge, his experience, his willingness to keep going. When they finished eating, Nathan put out the fire, and they both settled down for the night. Lyra lay on the ground, staring up at the stars. The sky was clearer here, and the stars seemed brighter than she had ever seen them before. It was strange, the way the universe felt both vast and small at the same time. She had come so far, yet she was so far from home. Her thoughts drifted to her people, to her family. Would they be searching for her? Would they even know she was gone? She could only hope that they were looking, but it seemed unlikely. The crash had been sudden, and there had been no communication after. For now, she was alone. But she wasn't truly alone. She had Nathan. And for the first time since the crash, she felt a flicker of hope. The days were beginning to blur together. The jungle seemed endless, the terrain always shifting, always new. Every step was a challenge, but Nathan and Lyra had learned to move through it with purpose. Each day they covered more ground, trying to find a way out of this vast, hostile world. The weather was unpredictable, shifting from scorching heat to torrential rain, but they had learned to adapt. Lyra, though still weak from the crash, had begun to regain some strength. Her wounds had healed enough that she no longer had to rely solely on Nathan for support. They had become a team. It wasn't a partnership Lyra had ever expected. She had been trained to lead alone, to rely only on her instincts and strength. Yet here she was learning to trust someone else, to work alongside another person. It felt foreign, but it also felt necessary. The jungle wasn't something you could conquer on your own. Today they had reached the edge of a wide ravine, its steep walls dropping off into a dark void. It was a landmark neither of them had expected to find, and the sight of it made Lyra feel a sense of relief, but also dread. The ravine seemed to mark a boundary, a place they could not cross without help, a place that threatened to stop them in their tracks. They had no idea what lay beyond it, but they couldn't afford to turn back. Nathan stood at the edge of the ravine, scanning the area ahead. His face was hard, unreadable, but Lyra could see the tension in his shoulders. He had been silent for the last few minutes, and she could sense that he was weighing their options. "What do we do now?" Lyra asked, her voice breaking the stillness. Nathan didn't answer immediately. He crouched down, his eyes narrowing as he studied the rocky walls of the ravine. "We find a way down, and we keep moving." Lyra's heart sank. She wasn't afraid of climbing, but the thought of scaling the jagged cliffs with no safety ropes, no clear path, filled her with unease. This ravine seemed to stretch on for miles, a deep chasm that would swallow them whole if they weren't careful. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she admitted quietly. She hated the weakness in her voice, but she couldn't hide it. She had come so far, but this was different. This was a test, one that she didn't feel prepared for. Nathan turned to her, his expression softening for the briefest moment. "We don't have a choice. We've come this far. We just need to focus, and we'll get through it. You're stronger than you think." Lyra looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. There was none. He was confident, resolute, and for the first time since the crash, Lyra realized something. She had been so focused on her own survival, on the things she had lost, that she had forgotten what it meant to push forward, to keep moving, no matter the obstacles. "I trust you," she said, her voice steady now. "Let's do it." With that, they began their descent. The rocks were sharp, the footing unstable, but Nathan led the way with ease. Lyra followed closely behind, her hands scraping against the rough stone as she moved. She focused on her breathing, blocking out the dizzying height, the overwhelming sense of danger. The world around her seemed to narrow into a single, manageable task, climbing down, one step at a time. As they descended, Lyra's thoughts wandered. She thought about her family, her people, wondering if they would ever find her. She thought about the future, what it would hold, and whether she would ever see her home again. The uncertainty of it all was like a weight on her chest, but she didn't let it stop her. She couldn't afford to dwell on the unknown. Not now. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the bottom. The ground was soft, covered in thick moss and tangled roots. The ravine had opened up into a small, sheltered valley, a place that seemed untouched by the chaos of the jungle. For a moment, Lyra allowed herself to relax, to take in the beauty of the space. The air was cool, the trees towering overhead, and the sound of running water nearby brought a sense of calm she hadn't felt in days. Nathan knelt by the stream, cupping his hands to drink. Lyra joined him, grateful for the fresh water. They hadn't had a proper meal in days, and their supplies were running low. But there was something about the moment, the stillness of the valley, the soft trickle of the stream, that made Lyra feel a sense of peace. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that they were still alive, still moving forward. "I think we're close," Nathan said, breaking the silence. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "The edge of the valley is just ahead. From there, we might be able to find a way out." Lyra looked up, following his gaze toward the distant trees. The valley wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a sign that they were getting closer. The jungle had given them its challenges, but they were pushing through them step by step. "You think there's a way off this planet?" Lyra asked, her voice tinged with doubt. She didn't want to sound pessimistic, but the thought of being stuck here forever was a fear she couldn't shake. Nathan didn't hesitate. "There's always a way, we'll find it." They didn't speak much after that. The trek through the valley was easier than the climb, the terrain more forgiving. They moved at a steady pace, both of them focused on the task ahead. Lyra's mind wandered again, but this time it wasn't to her past or to the unknown. It was to Nathan. She thought about his words, about how he had helped her through the worst of the jungle. He had been her guide, her protector. But more than that, he had become a friend, a companion in this strange, unforgiving place. As they neared the edge of the valley, they heard a rustling sound ahead. Lyra froze, her instincts kicking in. Nathan did the same, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. The sound came again, closer this time. Lyra's heart raced. "Stay behind me," Nathan whispered. Lyra nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. But Nathan had already moved ahead, his steps silent and swift. She watched as he crept forward, his eyes focused, his rifle ready. Then, out of the shadows, came a group of figures. At first, Lyra thought they were more creatures, more deadly predators. But as they stepped into the light, she realized they were human, another group of survivors, wearing tattered clothes and carrying weapons. They were as weary and ragged as Nathan, but there was something different about them. They weren't the mercenaries Lyra had feared. These people didn't seem dangerous. In fact, they seemed just as lost as she was. Nathan lowered his weapon, stepping forward cautiously. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. The leader of the group, a man with a scar across his cheek, nodded. "No, we've been stranded here for months. Our ship crashed just like yours. We're trying to find a way out." Lyra's heart lifted with a sudden rush of hope. These people might be the key. They had been here longer and they knew the land. They could help her and Nathan find a way off the planet. "We're looking for a way out too," Nathan said, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "We could use some help." The leader of the group looked at them both, his eyes calculating. "You don't trust us, do you?" he asked, his voice low. Nathan didn't respond right away. He was thinking, analyzing the situation. "I trust you," he said finally. "But if you try anything, I'll make sure it's the last thing you do." The leader smiled, a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough, we're all in the same situation here." With that, they began to talk, to share what they knew. Lyra listened closely, her mind racing. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the chance to find a way out.